something right in his time, and I'm not talking about mass murder. He was able to gather followers and gain their trust in a relatively short amount of time. How did he do this? Well, he was a genius when it came to the skill of charisma. Yes, he's a great example of charisma, but we're going to take a different route today. I'm an introvert, and I'm unlikely to network, speak up, or be outwardly social unless pushed to do so. So today, I'm going to share the skill of charisma that I'm working on, and we are going to look at the history of charisma in the workplace, its science, and why it's important. To start, let's look at the history. A few decades after World War II, the era of managerial capitalism emerged. According to Rakesh Kura, a Harvard Business Review author of The Curse of the Superstar CEO, issued in September 2002, the typical CEO at that time was called an organization man. And this means that he would work his way up from the bottom to the top and received little fame for his achievement during his time. When the 1980s hit, the era of investor capitalism and populist capitalism took over. This involved mission, vision, and value concepts, which created a culture where employees were proud to work at the corporation and wanted to further its goals. The public was also involved in investing in publicly traded companies, and they wanted more stories on this in the newspapers. The first example of a charismatic CEO was Lee Iacocca. He took over as the CEO of Chrysler in 1979, and he turned the company around. He also changed the culture of the company and created a culture where employees were proud to work for the goal. Michael Armstrong is also a great example of a charismatic CEO. He is the CEO of AT&T, and his colleagues say he radiates confidence, enthusiasm, and energy, and is the picture-perfect CEO. Lastly, Steve Jobs is also a great example. He is the founder of Apple and was formerly the CEO. He created the culture where employees were proud to work for the company and to further its goals, even if they weren't paid as high as they would at a competing company. Now that we know a little bit about its history, let's put it under a microscope by studying the science. Charisma is usually viewed as something you're born with, but this is false. This is a skill that can be learned. According to a 2016 article written by Pamela Spar and published by St. Thomas University, charisma can be broken down into 3 traits: stare like a lover, stand like a gorilla, and speak like a preacher. This is a little silly, so we can translate it into meaning displaying deep, meaningful eye contact, a stance of confidence, and your voice is resonant yet warm. According to Amy Cuddy's 2012 TED Talk entitled, "Your Body Language Shapes Who You Are," achieving enchantment comes down to carving the charismatic chemical combination in one's mind. And this can be done by the traits that I just listed. MRI scans show that there's an increase in testosterone and relatively low cortisol levels when you are charismatic. This means that you're more dominant from the testosterone, but you're keeping calm, cool, and collected from the low cortisol. By now we've studied the history and science. You're all probably asking yourselves, so what's the significance in the workplace? When charisma is used wisely, it can be a blessing, but when it's indulged upon, it can be a curse. Olivia Cabane's 2013 book entitled The Charisma Myth reveals charismatic people seem to lead charmed lives. They have romantic options, more money, and they experience less stress. Humans have an innate sense to follow charismatic leaders. They are quick to trust, and they also believe more in the success of the leader. But we've been focusing a lot on leaders today, so let's focus on how we can apply it to our individual lives. Charisma is important in the workplace because it can make or break opportunities that are offered to you. An example of this is in meetings. It is important to be charismatic when an opportunity for you to speak comes. This shows that you are open to adding value to the company and you want to further the goals. This can also be seen in day-to-day activities by working with your other coworkers to also further the goal. Lastly, it can also be seen in networking. Networking is awkward at first and no one really likes it. But when you add charisma to it, you are able to make connections quicker and easier, and these connections can ultimately lead to more opportunities in the future. Charisma and cockiness are very similar, so it's important for you not to cross the line. You don't want to come off as inflating yourself or being egotistical. Charisma dilutes rational assessment and distorts reality. So this is why Hitler was able to gather all those followers and gain their trust to perform one of the worst events in history. A few other examples of the wrongful use of charisma can be seen in Charles Manson and Osama bin Laden. But these are, again, leaders. So let's take a look at a more workplace-centered use of charisma that's improper. Andy Bernard is an example of this. When he was first transferred to the Scranton branch, he was wooing Michael and trying to manipulate those around him for his own selfish advancement to assistant to the regional manager. It ended up not working, and he lost the trust of a lot of the people around him in the office. Looking at the significance in the workplace has helped us to apply the history and science of why charisma is important and can be a useful skill. In closing, charisma is not a skill that first comes to mind when you're evaluating your skill set, but it can greatly aid in the workplace if used wisely. Today we talked about the history and how it's changed over time. Then we looked at the science and how charisma can be learned and not something you're born with. And lastly, we looked at the significance and how it can make or break any future opportunities that you have. Thank you.